from UBC Studios in Kampala. This is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
A very good morning to you. In case you've just joined, thank you so much for being with us here on UBC TV. Now, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra, an extension of Good Morning Uganda. We are here every weekday, and our broadcast live begins at 6:30. So just a humble reminder, make it a date with us every morning. I'll not forget to remind you, from 6:30, start your day with us. The Fantastic Four, I guarantee you, we will spice up your morning with the laughters, cheer you up, as well as it is a very informative show, so you get to know what is happening locally and internationally, so you fit in any meaningful discussion of the day. I'm Robert Chirabonyonyintono. Well, we are going to be discussing issues of disaster management. Now, we know it is a rainy season, and here in Uganda, usually this March to May, which happens to be our main rain season, sometimes we get floods, sometimes very many disasters happen. But we want to see, do we have a management plan as a country? What is entailed in this plan? And joining me on set this morning is Vian Musika, who happens to be a resilience specialist, with whom we are going to be discussing this. Vian, you're most welcome to our studios.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you again, Robert. Yes.
Well, just to begin with, to break the ice, when we talk about disaster, I know there are natural disasters and other forms of disasters, but for the specific context of what we are going to be discussing today, what are we referring to?
We are basically going to be referring more to climate-induced disasters, and specifically in the context of what we as a country face, or what normally challenges us. So our discussion is going to be basically centered around that. Yes.
And what forms of disaster are we talking about?
You know, before I can talk about the different forms of disasters, I want to highlight one of the most important plans or frameworks that our government has put in place, which they put in place in June last year. Our cabinet approved the first ever Uganda Disaster Management Plan. And I think this is a good thing, because as government...
Before we dive into that, you know, I want to first create a picture. That's something we're going to be discussing.
Yes.
But before, because when we talk about climate-induced disasters, the thing is, what are these? Because it will shape later the meaning of why this came in place.
Yes, basically disasters are phenomena, are events that happen, that put our lives, our livelihood, that put the assets, that put businesses at a risk, or can have potential. When these disasters happen, they have potential to cause damage. And again, I repeat, they have potential to cause damage either to our lives or livelihoods, our source of income, and property. They threaten, okay? They can cause damage or potential harm or damage. And there are different forms of disasters, and basically they have 4 levels. Level 1 are the types of disasters is when we have no disaster, okay? And when we talk of a time when we have no disasters, then that gives us an opportunity for something very important. That gives us an opportunity to do preparedness, what we call preparedness. And preparedness, when there is no disaster, like now, we have no major big disaster. We are coming out of Ebola, okay? There is actually, as we speak, a threat of another pandemic in Tanzania, as we speak, as of yesterday, Marburg in Tanzania, and that's the importance of this topic that we are talking about today. We have just coming out of Ebola, coming out of COVID. Now there is a threat of Marburg in Tanzania. What this means that at any time, these teach us that the disasters, it can be climate-induced disaster, it can be a disease outbreak, they are likely to happen. But in the time when there is no disaster, we undertake actions or activities that help us minimize the impact of a disaster when it happens. Okay? So during this time, it is an opportunity for us to undertake preparedness activities or actions that in case a disaster happens, and that's why we have that plan, then we will minimize its impact. And as you know, me and you may not stop a flood from happening, may not stop a drought, a prolonged drought from happening, but we can make sure that when it happens, it does not affect us that much. Level 2 are localized disasters. Localized disasters happen in a district, for example, and the district disaster management committees, the district authorities or the communities are able to manage or deal with the disaster. That is localized at the local level. We need to acknowledge in Uganda that sometimes disasters happen at a small scale. But even when they happen at a small scale, they affect lives and livelihoods of people. They affect certain households. They affect our communities. And that's why they are at level 2. Those localized disasters, those small-scale disasters that happen within our communities. And the other kind of disasters are those ones which affect more than one district. But when they affect more than one district, these districts or the district disaster management committees and the authorities do not have capacity, sufficient capacity to deal with this level of disaster. And that's where Prime Minister's Office, the Department of Disaster Preparedness and Management, and other actors come in to support those districts, those communities that have been affected. Because now the magnitude is a little more, and the district authorities and these local communities are not able to deal with the impact or the negative effect of that particular happening or occurrence. Then, and so that's why now the disaster department and other actors come in to support the district and the communities. Then we have the national level disasters. Okay? And these are of, they affect the whole country. In most cases, maybe, and the country will require even international assistance to come in, like what happened in Turkey and Syria recently, when they had an earthquake. It was so much damage in a short period of time that these countries, Syria and Turkey, required external or international assistance to be able to cope with the disaster. Those are disasters of national significance, that it requires everybody and every stakeholder to come in and support the country, support the government, support the communities, but even businesses to be able to cope. So we have those different 4 levels of disasters that affect us at the different levels. Now, the systems and processes that are in place for disaster management, for effective disaster management, should be able to bring out those different forms, so that at any time there is an occurrence or a disaster, people, communities are able to be supported, to be helped, they are able to cope. And we are talking about, when you're talking about climate resilient development, we are looking at leaving nobody behind. Okay? Those are big words that we normally use. We are talking about building back better. So we are saying for 2023, even when there is a small-scale disaster that has affected a few households somewhere in Ududa, for example, or in Soroti, okay, then there is enough response mechanism to support the recovery of these communities.
Well, that said and well explained. Now, I know in disaster management there are about 3 phases. One, being proactive.
Yes.
Then there's the activeness when it has happened. I usually refer to that as surgical operations. How are we doing one at the preventative? Because most of the time, Uganda, we are having enough scientists. The meteorological department will warn we are or we expect this amount of rains, therefore we may have floods in this particular area. And how are we doing as a government at that level 1 of saying we've gotten information, let's be proactive? Then we have managing winters occurred. We've woken up, we've had landslides. How are we doing at that level as a country? Then the third and most important is after
it has
happened, the recovery process. I want us to try and analyze these 3 levels, how you're moving as a country.
As you are aware, and that's why I want to really highlight the importance and the significance of this disaster management plan. Because its vision is basically looking at a disaster resilient Uganda that is able to prepare, that is able to respond, but also cope with disasters. That is the vision of the disaster management plan. And we realize that if that vision is achieved, actions are taken to achieve that vision in the disaster management plan, then we are saying that as we pursue sustainable development, as the implementation of NDP3 continues and we are tracking progress on how we are doing, government and other actors, on the implementation of NDP3, but also pursuing the bigger vision 2040, we are saying that as these disasters happen, we need to be resilient. We're looking at climate resilient development, incorporating it in our annual plans, in our normal strategies, and as a country. But there has been progress. There has been notable strides in terms of preparedness activities, and that's where the Uganda Meteorological Authority comes in on what we call early warning information dissemination, because they help us put together the weather forecast, and this is disseminated to the various parts of the country and the communities to be able to know the weather and what is likely to happen, the rains, the sunshine, and so that people are informed and they know what to do when. Okay, so there are those preparedness activities, and there are mechanisms within which this information is being disseminated. However, we are saying it is good there is already a mechanism, but we need to ensure that the issue of information dissemination, sharing early warning information, we need to use effective means and mediums to ensure that this information reaches that last mile farmer that needs it to make the right decision to plant the right crops, reaches that businessman in the villages that need to know what business action decision they need to make so that they invest wisely across the board. So we need to use the right means and mechanisms of communication to make sure that this information is reaching far wide, and reaching that what we call last mile household and last mile businessman, which is everywhere. So there are some steps and there are some initiatives by government and other actors to make sure that there is effective, there are more actions, early actions are being undertaken to ensure that we have proper preparedness. And when a disaster happens, then there is a minimal effect or impact of this of a disaster. But also when we talk about emergency response.
Before we go to emergency response,
yes,
you've said we're moving in the right direction. But one, some of this information trickling down to the intended people remains a problem. Some is in very scientific language,
yes,
that is to be interpreted by the ordinary Ugandan. Two, even when people get this information, sometimes we're not provided alternatives. I'll give an example. We've had a number of floods when we talk about Bududa, and we still struggle to relocate these people that are prone to these calamities. We still struggle. There are countries I know that even carry out, pardon me, what they call forceful evacuation. That the government will notice and will say, well, this is not a safe area for you. So, either you want, or you have bury your ancestral grounds here, you have a tent that houses the hut for your spirits and all that. The army, coercive forces, evacuate you. So how good are we doing when even we struggle? One time we expect to build about 900 houses. We have 200. Recently I saw an attempt to give, I think, these families, was it about 17 million? Then I think an additional 5 to relocate. So when you talk about...
When we talk about preparedness, one of the pillars of preparedness is mindset change.
Now that is another terminology. You technical people you've developed
now, mindset
in
change.
Our country.
Yes.
As a scapegoat.
No, not
today, but everything mindset change.
Now,
mindset
the importance
change.
of that is, you see, a senior 6 leaver goes to medical school. And after 6 years, he's open to cut a human being, cause you to be dead for a while, operate you, and again bring you back to life. What has happened? Transformational mindset change. I think that means his mind, the mind of this particular person, has been tuned to understand how this should be done, and they are able to take the right action. And for preparedness activities now, raising the concerns, what we want to say is consistent awareness raising until someone understands the importance of, one, why climate change? Why are these disasters happening, and why are they affecting us? For example, they're affecting us because we are staying, I built in a flood-prone area. So if I built in a flood-prone area, we are saying mindset change should not be a one-off. Now, because there are flash floods in Kasese or Bududa or Mbale, then you do some awareness raising, and then after that, go to bed and keep quiet. No, we are saying it should happen consistently and passing out particular critical information. That's why we are saying using the right means of communication, using the right language. Now, you're talking about technical jargons that people don't understand. Simplifying it, and that's what I'm trying to do today. To try and simplify the importance and the significance of Uganda putting in place and having a disaster management plan. That it sets forth a framework. It gives you and me, and because we are all responsible, to know what should we do. It profiles Uganda's risks. It profiles where they happen and how they happen. So this information is available, and therefore we need to use it. And that's why we are saying, so that you can appreciate, someone can appreciate, if they say, for example, you're supposed to be relocated from area X to area Y, which is safer, then someone should be able to understand why it is important, why it is good for their life and for their safety to move from this area and go to another area. And then that's where, in addition to just having the information, we use also early champions, people who, opinion leaders, people who speak and people listen. So there the church leaders come in, the cultural leaders come in, security comes in, the technical, so it is an integrated approach to be able to, because a technical person like me, the way I communicate is different from the way a bishop will communicate. And the people will receive us differently. But if we combine together, a bishop as a church leader is able to say what he's supposed to, or a priest. Me as a technical person, I say what I'm, then together over time. You get, I think the issue of disaster management in this country, we need to take it a notch higher like Coca-Cola does. Okay? I think Coca-Cola's vision is to, at arm's distance, there should be a Coca-Cola product. I think even when you go to your village, deep in the village, you find a Coca-Cola product. But they still advertise. So we need to pass on this information, the early warning information, again and again, using different strategies and platforms to make sure that people receive it, communities that are affected by disasters, but even the business people, so that we are able to make the right decision, but also different people know their roles and responsibilities. Okay, so when we talk about preparedness, that's why the issue of early warning information dissemination is critical and important.
I love the fact that you've said we need to make this so regular.
Irregular, yes.
I think as a country, we either have so much and very little to deliver, because most of the times we seem to act when there is danger. And we seem to be so much on it's a one-off. I remember there was a time when this country, everyone was talking about irrigation, when you had a severe drought. Irrigation, we are going to allocate, that came to an end. When we had to do the issues, our parliament, our politicians, everybody was talking about that. You know, when we are not nearing rainy season, so advocacy is something that is not continuous in this country. And
that's why we are now emphasizing, okay, the issue of moving away from promises to commitment. Don't just speak. If you're committed to a cause, undertake the right action. And that's why we're talking, turn these good ideas, these good plans, these good strategies, these good policies into action. Walk the talk. Okay? And that's why we are saying we must walk the talk in all the three phases of disaster management. There has been some increased response in terms of when a disaster happens from government and also different actors. The turnaround time to ensure that in case a flood has happened in Mbale or in Kasese or Bududa or any other part of the country, there is quick response to ensure that communities, affected communities, are supported towards making sure that there is return to life. But in emergency response, when we are ensuring that there is safety of life and property, we are saying returning life close to normal. That's why you see they will be giving a blanket, they will be giving a jerry can, they will make sure there is some water. We are trying to make sure that the affected person is helped to return life close to normal. And then after that, that's when now we talk about recovery. But again, we are saying currently emergency response is still very decentralized. Okay? It is depending, now remember I talked about the different levels of disasters and how they affect us. So depending on the nature of the disaster, the magnitude, the effect or the impact of the disaster requires different responses. Okay? But for the big significant disasters, our disaster management system is still decentralized.
Best in Kampala, Office of the Prime Minister.
Kampala. And now that's why we are talking about the enactment of the Disaster Preparedness and Management Bill. Because we have a policy of disaster preparedness and management policy of 2011. We are saying two things, that we need to have the Disaster Preparedness and Management Bill so that then it takes care of certain issues that have emerged over time. And one of those issues is decentralization of disaster management, at least at regional level. So that in case there is a disaster in a particular place, the time of response is more faster than coming from Kampala.
Well, you know,
and that should, yes, and that should be done, should be, and these all are stated in the disaster management plan. It is, what I'm saying is clearly stated. And so now, and that goes along with two things. The prerequisite capacity building capacity of the different actors to be able to do the things they need to do right, technical capacity. To be able for people to be supported to do the right things in case of an emergency, in case of a disaster. So building capacity, because imagine if right now we take a census and count how many staff at OPM that are supposed to support disaster response. They are lean, they are small to support the whole country. So building capacity across board and with bringing different actors on board, that's very, very important. And the bill will bring out those frameworks. Then also financial resource, because we may talk good English, have good intentions, but if we don't have the financial capacity or muscle to enable us undertake the desires, the aspirations and the goals, then it keeps a white elephant. But in the Constitution, there is a designated disaster contingency fund of 3.5% of the annual budget. Again, this is why we need Parliament that does allocation of resources to make sure that actually these three, given the disasters that we are facing, and what is likely to come even in 2023, to ensure that this 3.5% of the contingency fund is actually allocated and is there. The research indicates that only 15% of the 3.5 is normally available for disaster, for emergency response.
Which becomes a challenge when disasters
So when disasters happen, then there is, first of all, there is inadequate financial resources to enable emergency response. Now, we are talking about, because you talked about the issue of being more reactionary. And these things feed into that we need to do adequate and effective preparedness actions.
No doubt.
And then, when we are saying, now when we have prepared and we've done the information dissemination, taken, not only information, taken relevant actions, remember the importance of preparedness is to minimize the effect of a disaster, the damage that a disaster will, when it happens, you reduce the damage or the effect. So that means you take some actions, some interventions. Now, emergency response, then it helps us not to be reactionary. Because we know when it is going to flood. We know where it is going to flood.
Yes.
But you know when it happens, then we You know, it's like we were not aware. And therefore, we need to move away from reactionary to effective preparedness and timely response when a disaster happens.
Now, you talked about, this may not be in the policy, but you sounded bells of an alarm to me when you talked about decentralizing. One of the challenges I've found in our country is when it comes to handling material used to assist people when disaster strikes.
Now,
Aid items, basins will find issues,
now,
buckets will find issues. Yet it is centralized
yes,
under a few hands of people. How with the decentralization? I think that has been one of the biggest challenges when it comes to disaster management in our country. That either we've fairly lacked, I want to use the word fairly lacked, people of integrity. Procurement has found its challenges. You either take blankets, not blankets, or sacks in form of blankets. Tablings that don't, you know, it becomes a problem.
I think you raise an important point. And that's why now when we talk about emergency response, especially for Uganda as we speak, we know there is this whole ongoing thing to do with the famous iron sheets. But I think for us as actors, we need to appreciate that we need to appreciate where we are coming from, where we are, and then what do we need to do better going forward. In emergency response and any other programming, we talk about lessons learned and best practices. And I think right now what we need to put our emphasis on is to improve emergency response in Uganda and this country. What are the things what things do we need to do better? Where do we need to improve? When you talk about planning, we talk about procurement, you talk about distribution, you talk about access of these materials by the beneficiaries or the affected communities. At each stage of emergency response, I think as a government, but also even other actors, we have very good lessons that have been learned, best practices out of every situation that we faced as a country, and say, okay, this is where we are coming from, this is where we are, and this is how we are going to move forward and do better to make sure that in case anything is happening in regards to whether materials, whether they are non-food items or food items in regards to emergency response, they have been procured and the distribution strategies or plans are clear and to reach the target beneficiary, and that is specifically communities that are affected. I think for me, when I'm having this discussion, is in these things, the successes are as good as the challenges.
Well, let me first go for a short break. I'll be returning with Vianney, and we will still be looking at what we have in place as a country in far as disaster management and, of course, disaster preparedness. We have a full ministry that handles this. There have been challenges here and there, but how do we move forward? Is the plan we have for this country the solution, or do we need any amendments, or has it been short of proper implementation? We'll return shortly.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
10 years of supporting health in Uganda. This year, the Kabaka Birthday Run will mark its 10-year anniversary on Sunday, 16th April at Lubidi, starting 7 a.m. And continue the fight to end AIDS by 2030. Buy your running kit today at 20,000 shillings from Airtel Shops, Benchwanuka, Fubani, New Taxi Pack, or Majestic Brands office in Bulange Mango. You can also pay using Airtel Money. Dial *185 *5 hash. Kits purchased using Airtel Money shall be picked from Airtel Wampe or Shop. Proudly sponsored by
One-on-One with Michael Jordan Lukomwa.
A weekly face-to-face conversation focusing on accountability, inspiration, information, and sensitization of the public from the various sources such as inspirational profiles,
having disability is not inability,
professional guidance.
There is no special antiretroviral therapy that is given specifically for discordant couples.
And of course, politics.
Don't you see anywhere that you would give a credit in the fight against COVID?
My role as the owner of the country is not to, be preoccupied by giving credit to my servant.
We have said that if we are to talk to General Museveni, there must be certain conditions in place.
Is it true that you paid 5 million shillings to MPs that voted for Anita Mong and Tayebo?
That is laughable. Why would we pay when we have nominated them as SEC?
Every party has been represented in Uganda's parliament for 10 years. We only by one MP, you yourself and my daughter, Susan.
Every Friday 9 p.m. it's One-on-One with Michael Jordan Lukomwa on UBC TV, inspiring Uganda.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're descending into Entebbe Airport. For those proceeding to Kampala City, the biggest event in East Africa is in town.
That's right, the East African Business Expo 2023 is happening from the 23rd to the 26th of March at Kololo Grounds. Join us to network, connect, and grow. Contact us for exhibition or sponsorship opportunities. The 14th East African Procurement Forum and Business Expo 2023 is hosted by PPBA.
Now sit back and relax. It's time to explore great business opportunities.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Thank you for keeping it with us here on UBC TV. It is Good Morning Uganda Extra, and today we are discussing disaster management. I'm Robert Chirabo Nyonitono, and with me I have Vianney Musika, who happens to be a resilience specialist with whom we're handling this topic. Now, we are looking at Uganda's disaster risk management plan. We are trying to unpack it and see, is it answering the challenges that are facing our country? With climate change, every day the world is waking up to new disasters of greater magnitude than they were previously. Uganda not left out. Many will tell you things like these disasters we hear, the floods we talk about today. Decades back, they were not something we're experiencing. Of course, man has a direct impact on that. Of course, human activity, we've played with Mother Nature, and when she speaks, her wrath really is something that we feel the pain. But looking at all this that we've said in the plan we have, what can we do different? Because we seem to be doing slightly the same things. You know, do some talking, do some warning, then when it happens, rush there. I want to commend the Uganda Red Cross.
Yes.
Society, I think, have not seen any disaster where they've not been part of.
Absolutely.
They're doing a great job in terms of disaster management. They may not be in the preparedness, but at least when disaster strikes, you always see them there. And I also want to commend our government, Vianney. I think in terms of quick response, today floods happen somewhere, landslides.
Yes, and that's what I was talking about.
And
yes.
just within, the Prime Minister's rushed there, blankets are moving, jerry cans are moving, of course leaving out quality and quantity and what is to be gotten. But there's some bit of improvement. We no longer hear people not. So I think we just have a problem in preparedness, and thereafter the disaster occurs. So what can we do different?
Thank you. And we ended at a very, very interesting point of saying, in this cycle of disaster management, the successes are as important as the challenges. Okay? And therefore, the successes as a country highlight the strengths and the opportunities that we have as a country in regards to disaster management. And that's why, for example, this particular tool, the disaster management tool, is a game changer in this process. And that's very, very, and we know when we take urgent affirmative climate action, then it gives us a basis and an environment for a livable future. Because these disasters are going to happen in the future, in May, during the rainy season. So that's why the linkage of climate change and disasters is very clear. And you know, the IPCC report actually is saying that the sixth report, which was released Monday this week on 20th, clearly indicates that the options to undertake for affirmative climate action are available. The science is available, the technology is available, okay? However, these actions must be taken. We must, as I had said earlier, move away from just promises to commitment. Move away from just ideas to action. Okay? And Uganda has had, and we've had our fair share of the different disasters that we face as a country. And we've had flash floods, prolonged dry spells. We've even had the locusts, you know, pests and diseases breaking out. And then definitely we know the Ebola pandemic, and then the Ebola epidemic, then the COVID pandemic. Therefore, this plan states different things that we need to do differently. And so, and some of them are really the two that I have already mentioned. We need to review the disaster management policy of 2011. A decade has passed since that policy was put in place. So we need to review this policy and update it with current emerging issues that were not in place when it was formulated and put in place. That needs to be done. And then we also need to, as I had said earlier, have the disaster preparedness and management bill enacted and put in place. And this will put in place various frameworks within which we can improve on the disaster management. And under that, I just want to highlight two. I want to highlight the issue of decentralizing disaster management, but also putting in place one of the most important frameworks in this bill will be gazetting a disaster management fund. A disaster management fund, having put in place a framework for a disaster management fund, and this disaster management fund, in addition to the 3.5% stated contingency fund stated in the Constitution, allows other players to come in and support, in addition to what is available, having a joint resource mobilization strategy for disaster management in this country, and the state be able to elaborate that these resources will be mobilized like this. They will come from these actors. This is how they will be spent, a clear framework on how they will be spent and allocated, and this is how they will be accounted for. And these are the key performance indicators. This is the change that we want to see. That bill will be able to stipulate the framework within which these resources can support disaster management. That's why that bill is important. And we have where to draw lessons from. We will draw lessons from at the peak of COVID. We saw government, which we had never seen, we say a practice that we never seen before in Uganda, led by the president himself, coming up and calling on different parties, both individuals and institutions, to come and support the Ebola response. And we saw people coming in. But to me, the lesson I picked from there is there was no clear response, clear framework on how these resources should be allocated, how they should be spent and accounted for. Because if I give in my 100 shillings, let alone, even if I don't ask, it would be good for me to come back and say, your 100 shillings, we were able to give to ensure that communities in Uganda accessed safe water.
Today I see the parliamentary committee talking about questioning cars. Where are these cars? Who are having them? They should come back. They should be returned.
Having that clear framework of in regards to disaster management, so that when we get the 3.5%, for example, we say we have this much, but our bill is this much. And I'm telling you, when government puts in place that framework and takes lead, there are different actors within the disaster management space that will be able to support the initiatives. And the issue, the financial question on disaster management will be, to a big extent, solved through that framework. But even the private sector to come on board, even individuals to come on board and support to ensure, because a disaster, it does not discriminate whether you're tall or short, whether you're big or small. It does not discriminate between a religion, whether you're Catholic or Protestant or a Muslim or none. It does not discriminate between a female and a male, although research indicates that women and children and they are more affected, they are more vulnerable when a disaster happens compared to men. That is very, very critical. The other thing is really capacity building. I had already mentioned it, but capacity building, being able to build capacity of the different sectors and across the board from national level to grassroots, for people to be able to understand issues of disaster management, understand their roles and responsibilities and the actions that they need to undertake. So as a head of the household, I should be, the capacity building for a household head is different from a political leader. Okay? So the capacity building for disaster management should be tailor-made for the different categories of stakeholders and actors. And that's very, very important. But also, we definitely in capacity building, we have software. That is the training building for people to mindset change and training them in different aspects of disaster management and different forms. But also there is the hardware. For example, we need a disaster information management system, where if a disaster happens in your village, the LC1 is able to immediately report and say 10 households in my village have been
submerged, and
that information is decentralized and received, and immediate action and response or communication is made. And that is hardware. You need that system in place, and we have to benchmark, because our Ministry of Health has a system, and they have their system that works perfectly with the VHTs in villages. So that is a good benchmark for us to improve the disaster management response and other actions that I want us to talk about later. The issue of recovery, because we've talked about preparedness and response. We've not talked about recovery.
That will be a topic for another day. I must let you go. Let me just give you a minute to summarize.
So thank you very much. We cannot stop disasters from happening. Government and other actors have already put in place favorable frameworks and policies that enable, that empower us to ensure there is effective disaster management in this country, to ensure that we minimize the effect of disasters when they happen. And therefore, each one of us has a responsibility to do our part. Okay? But also we need to rise up and make sure that the relevant, required, urgent action is undertaken at the different levels, at community level, at the district level, but also at the national level. And the different things that I mentioned earlier, it is also high time that they are put in place. This plan is implemented. So I call upon definitely government that this plan will not be a white elephant, but we ensure its coordinated implementation, but also other actors to come in and support to ensure that the different priority areas identified by this plan are fully implemented, but also supported, so that the next time we have a disaster in this country, we are not reactionary, but we are proactive and we know what to do. But also emphasize the issue of recovery, that when a disaster has happened, then we are able to support the affected communities, the affected businesses long term, so that their lives and livelihoods can return to full operation.
Well, thank you so much, Vianney Musika, who happens to be a resilience specialist. We've been looking at Uganda's disaster risk management plan and trying to unpack it, of course, to see how best it can help prevent. Though we say disasters may never stop happening, but I believe there are those we can prevent that are obvious. When rich people in this country decide to build on hilltops and clear the vegetation. Then when rains come, those in the valleys or at the slope of these have landslides that we can't prevent. When rich people decide to put marram in these swamps, and when it happens, water has to look for its channels, that we can't prevent. But those that we can't prevent, how do we prepare and minimize the impact on livelihood or on man? How do we ensure that we don't have this? So this is what we've been discussing. Let's make this world a better place. Have a lovely day. See you tomorrow, God willing.